Vern's classic tale, Around the World in 80 Days.
Hello and welcome to Lost in Sci-Fi and Fantasy. I'm your host, Leo, and today we are talking about Around the World in 80 Days, written by Jules Verne in 1872. I am discussing the book, none of the film adaptations today, but I will probably get to those some point down the line, maybe. Maybe far off in the future, because overall, this was my first Jules Verne book, and my overall impression is, boy, I hope they get better from here on. So, for a project I'm working on, I have to read 4 Jules Verne books. The first one is Around the World in 80 Days. The second one is going to be 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Then a more obscure one, Off on a Comet. And then finally wrapping up with Journey to the Center of the Earth. These are for an art project that I'm doing for charity down the line. Whether or not I get selected is, a question for way down the line. But that's kind of the reason I'm reading these books. Doing episodes on them is just kind of an extra bonus reason to read them a little bit faster. Because then I get content out of it. Anyway, so Around the World in 80 Days comes with a little bit of a warning beforehand, at least from me. It is very old-timey, as it was written in 1872, so expect not a lot of cultural sensitivity or cultural knowledge, because it was written in 1872 by a Frenchman writing about an Englishman, so no, it's just a mess in regards to other people's. It's not great. But that aside, just putting that aside for most of this, it is an okay book. It is really short, coming in at 170 pages in my version. That is unabridged, though how you can abridge it further than it is already short, I have no clue. Like, if you abridged it further, it would be a pamphlet. Like, geez, this thing it's the shortest of the books I have set aside for my project. And, yeah, I will say, though, that it does kind of feel like it drags a bit. But that's mostly down to the characters and, like, the overall plot. But we'll get into that now as we kind of go through the plot. So the story is about a gentleman named Phileas Fogg. Now, I always thought it was Phineas, but the way it's spelled in this book is Phileas, so okay. So, in this, he wagers half of his fortune with his card buddies because of an article that they read in a newspaper. He read in the newspaper that, they got it down to where you could do the trip in 80 days. His friend says, nah, there's a bunch of factors that would get in your way. So, 80 days is, if everything goes perfectly. And Phileas says, no, they've accounted for that. They've accounted for any, wiggle room of errors and whatnot that may go on. So, you can do it in 80 days. And thus, the bet is made. He wagers half of his fortune against, I think it's 4,000 from each of them. And half of Mr. Fogg's fortune is 20,000 pounds. So, he puts that up, writes a banknote for them, or a check for them to cash in the event that he fails the challenge. He then sets off on his journey then and there. Rewinding it back a bit, is the introduction of the character of Passepartout, who comes to Mr. Fogg looking for a extremely stable, reliable person. He's had people that he worked for that, had all these wild fancies. They would go off on a whim, do these wild parties and whatnot. And he didn't like that. He wanted someone extremely regimented. And Mr. Fogg seemed to be that man. He had everything planned to a T. Literally, he had a whole schedule of his day to where he would count the steps to the step to get where he was going. And he would follow that routine perfectly. But then immediately they set off on this trip, kind of throwing that out the window into why does he stay with him? But we'll move that along. It skips over to kind of giving some background information as to like what's happening in England at the time of this bet. Not, the political situation or anything, but like how people are reacting to the bet. And the fact that it starts to take a sour turn when he is kind of assumed to be a bank robber who stole £50,000 from a bank in the dumbest way. Literally, according to this book, in the world of this book, they are so open and okay and trustworthy that they just leave the bank vault open in broad daylight for anyone to just walk into whenever they want. And so a gentleman did just that. He walked in, stole £50,000 and walked out. And the description was just vague enough to perfectly match Mr. Fogg's description. So when he gets spotted by a detective Fix coming into India, he assumes that is the man. He is the one who stole the money, and he's using a trip around the world as an excuse to flee the police. But of course, he isn't. The book, I think, is trying to maybe throw you off into thinking that maybe he actually did do it, because they so happen to make it to where his fortune is so specifically around the amount of money that was stolen, and also they make it a big deal that they don't know how he got his fortune or what exactly he does, just that he's part of the Reform Club and he's a very, punctual man. Then it kind of skips because they're set to go to Paris, but it skips Paris, and we rejoin them on a train headed to Bombay, I believe. Then from there, they take a boat across to hit the mainland of India. Then they take a train across India so that they can catch a steamer to Japan, then take another steamer from Japan across the Pacific to America, take a train across America, and then finally take a steamer to London. That is their planned route. But they run into some trouble in India because Fix is constantly trying to get a warrant for his arrest, but not quite getting it when he needs it. So he comes up with schemes to try to slow them down and get them caught on, well, I guess technically at the time, English soil. Big heavy quotation marks around that, because they're in India at the time. One of his schemes is basically he just likes to feed off of Passepartout's tendency to do dumb stuff. So in India, Passepartout, for some reason, decides to just pal about for a bit. I mean, sure, Mr. Fogg does send him out every so often to buy supplies and whatnot, and in this case, more clothes, because they set out immediately with just a carpet bag of money. So he walks into a temple that you are not supposed to wear shoes in, and is accosted by, I think, the monks or the priests of the temple, and has his shoes ripped off of him. So he then starts walking about shoeless, and that gives Fix the kind of justification to hold Mr. Fogg and Passepartout in India as they go to their next location. But they're kind of waylaid on the way because the train that was supposed to have been finished wasn't. They still had 50 miles to finish on the track, so they had to find transport to get from one part of the unfinished track to the other. So to solve this problem, Mr. Fogg purchases an elephant, and they are joined by a colonel that they met on the train. They start riding this elephant into the forest, or into the jungle, and come across a ritual taking place in which the wife of a husband can choose to go with their husband upon death, basically sacrificing themselves to stay with their husband. Although they learn through a very convenient way that this woman is not choosing to do it, she's being forced to do it. So they mount a rescue mission in which, after a couple of failed attempts, they just kind of, when the ceremony's about to begin, they just kind of grab her and run. So they save her, and they find out, well, India is not exactly the best place for her to be right now. So let's take her to her uncle in Hong Kong, who has a trading business there. So they take her along. But in their next stop, they are waylaid by the police and sent to court to face trial for Passepartout entering a temple with shoes. Mr. Fogg then decides to throw money at his problem. He pays his bail and the judge says, okay, you're free to go. If you want your money back, you're going to have to, serve the time, which is only like a week or two. I think it's a week for Mr. Fogg and 2 weeks for Passepartout. So if he wanted his money back, he'd have to go back to India to get the £2,000, I think it was, bail. So then they continue on their way, thwarting Fix, and they're able to catch their steamer to Hong Kong. Once in Hong Kong, Mr. Fogg goes to find out where this woman, whose name is Ada, where her uncle is, or Auda. It's a name. He goes to try to find her uncle, and he finds out that he's no longer in Hong Kong. He went to like Wales or something, somewhere in Europe. So he offers to let her continue with them on to Europe. And so she takes him up on that. They also find out that the steamer that they are to get on has been delayed. So it's under repair. They're going to have to, find some means of just waiting. They're going to have to wait until the next day. So, but Passepartout goes and finds out that the transport is actually leaving that night. So he goes to go tell his employer, but Fix diverts him to a bar, because at this point they're kind of buddy-buddy. They're friends. They don't... Fix is hiding his intentions, and he's been following them around. He's been pretending to be a businessman. But he takes Passepartout into an opium house / bar and gets him drunk. Reveals his intentions, tries to get him on his side, fails, so decides to drug him. Because they're in an opium den, there's a pipe just on the table for use. He hands it to Passepartout, who drunkenly takes it and passes out. But, as we are to find out later, he does vaguely remember that the ship's leaving that evening and is able to board it himself, forgetting to tell his master, forgetting to tell his employer. So, cut to Mr. Fogg and Auda and Fix. He learns that the steamer left the evening before, next day. He learns that it left, and he's not able to find Passepartout, but he is able to find a different means of transport that, well, it can't get them to Japan, because they're going to Yokohama. It can't get them to Japan. It can try to get them to Singapore to get them on the ship that would be going to Japan, and then from Japan to America. So they are able to do that, but they run into some storms, but the storms tend to be a bit more advantageous than detrimental to them, and they're able to get there just as the ship is leaving, and they're able to waylay the ship to get on board to get to Japan. Meanwhile, Passepartout gets to Japan, sobers up, realizes, I kind of forgot them back in Hong Kong. Whoops. And has to kind of bide his time. He, for some reason, keeps walking in and out of the town, and then eventually decides that he's going to join a circus that has a bunch of problems with it. But we'll get to that later. So he joins a circus, and in the middle of the performance, he recognizes Mr. Fogg is in the crowd, so he just leaves mid-performance, joins up with Mr. Fogg. They get on the ship, and they leave. They head for America. They reach America, have a few minor altercations in San Francisco. But they're able to get on the train and start their way across America. They do run into a few problems, like a bridge going out and them just kind of having to Wile E. Coyote their way across. Basically, they get stopped, and they're told that the bridge, that if they were to cross, they would only be a mile away from their next station. But it's a bit wiggly. So, the plan was to leave the train there, go around until they met a fjord to where they could get across the river. They would go around to get across the river, then they would make their way to town, but that would be 10 extra miles of walking that they would have to do. Then someone suggests, we could probably do it. We just got to get a good run-up on it. The entire time, Passepartout's just like, but what about if we just walked across the bridge and then brought the train over? Which I was sitting there just like, why don't you just walk across the bridge? Then you only have a mile to walk instead of doing 10 miles. The bridge might not support a train, but it could probably support the people. But they go for the Wile E. Coyote method of just get a good run-up on it. Or I guess technically this would be the Roadrunner method because it works. They're able to get across, and they end up overshooting the town by like a few miles because the train's going at 100 miles an hour, and they just kind of skim over the bridge, and the bridge collapses behind them. But they're going so fast that by the time they stopped, they were like a few miles outside of town. And I think they either continued on or they backed up to the town. I can't remember. After this, the next incident that they run into is the train gets attacked by Native Americans. Passepartout, in order to try to stop the train, decouples the engine, and the thing is able to come to a stop. He gets kidnapped, then rescued, and because the train left without them after, the engine, once the engineers woke up, they backed the engine back up to the train and then loaded up and took off while Passepartout was being rescued. And so they decided to take sleds. Like, the image it evokes in my mind is those windsurfing people. Those big sails that connected to a surfboard, but make the surfboard a bit bigger. And that's essentially what they start just like booking it down the plains on. Well, which is a really cool image, but a bit meh. Then from there, they just miss the boat that would take them to Europe. But through some clever negotiation, he's able to secure another boat. This boat, though, is not going where he wants it to, but he still offers the money to go there instead of where he needed to go in Europe, in England. So what he does is, while en route, once they were a good distance out, he sparks a bloodless mutiny on the ship, takes control, burns all of the coal trying to get to England, and then once he runs out of coal, because there wasn't enough coal to actually get to England, they had enough coal to get to where they were going, but not to England. So he brings the captain on deck and offers to pay for the ship. He pays the cost of what he paid for the ship, or what the ship was worth new, and then starts dismantling the ship and using it as fuel to get to England. They start running a little short on ship by the time they get to Ireland, so they decide to disembark there, catch a faster mode of transport to England. They get in, then Fix arrests him, then releases him when he realizes that, it was the wrong guy. They got the real guy 3 days ago. He mopes around sad for a bit because he thinks that he lost, but it turns out that he was actually 24 hours early. He just didn't count the fact that he had gained a day, or that he had lost a day. So he comes in at the last minute, and victory. He marries the woman that had just joined them on their journey, and they live happily ever after, and he's rich again. So it's a neat story. There is some things where you look at the movie adaptations and you're like, okay, I can kind of see why they zhuzhed it up a bit. Like, I'd seen at least one version. I saw the Stephen Coogan movie, and in that there's a hot air balloon and a flying machine, and he's an inventor. But in this, he is a very stoic man. Like, he is the poster child of being stoic. No matter what happens, he shows no emotion whatsoever. He always takes everything that comes at him and just nothing. He just stone-faced, takes it, moves on. There's only a few moments where, like, emotion kind of bubbles under the surface, but he doesn't actually, show it. That is when a man insults his honor, and he challenges him to a duel. Though originally he was trying to reschedule the duel for after the bet was over, so that he would come back in 6 months and then shoot him with a gun. But instead they try to settle the duel right then and there, but the train gets attacked. That kind of thing. Then at the very end, he starts to show a bit of emotion when he's sad that he probably lost the challenge. He punches Fix in the face when he gets released, which is kind of funny. Then when he kind of proposes to Auda, he, shows some emotion there, but he still, for the most part, stays the stoic man throughout. Some of the problems with the book, besides the fact that he's a very stoic man, is it's very short, and a lot happens within the span of literally 2 pages. They will start off on one page acquiring the ship, for example, and on the other page they'll have reached Ireland. That's how fast it can happen sometimes. But it's a relatively quick read. I stopped at some points because it does get a little bit tiring to just have these things kind of wash over him, or Passepartout just freaking out in a corner because a train's not going fast enough or a boat isn't going fast enough, because almost everyone else gets extremely invested except for Phileas Fogg. He just seems like he doesn't care. When asked, he says, "Oh, it's very important. I need to get, to this place." But he just acts like he doesn't care too much, which can get a little bit annoying to read. A bit of a fair warning: when reading Jules Verne books, for some reason, they like to spoil the entire book on the back of the book. For example, the second paragraph on the Around the World in 80 Days book that I have says, "Fogg and Passepartout, his devoted manservant, avail themselves of virtually every known means of transportation on their wild race against time, all while a devious detective dogs their every step and introduces fresh obstacles. The resourceful Fogg faces each new trial with unshakable aplomb. Through a constantly shifting background of exotic locales, from the jungles of India, a Chinese opium den, a Japanese circus, to a full-throttle train ride under attack by Sioux, and a bloodless mutiny aboard a tramp steamer." That's literally all of the main plot lines kind of outlined on the back of the book. So so be careful of reading the back of the book. The chapters are extremely short, so it's kind of a Dan Brown situation here, where this 170-page book has 36 chapters. It kind of baffles the mind. The next book I'm going to read has 47 chapters, but it is 430-something pages, so it's a little bit more justified. Not much, but a little bit. There's a running gag, I guess you could say, that is brought up a little bit in the beginning, not really mentioned too much throughout the middle, and then very lightly resolved at the end. The running through line of Passepartout's gas bill. So, upon the rush of leaving their house, Passepartout forgot to turn off his gas lantern in their house. And Mr. Fogg just kind of waves it off and says, "It burns at your expense." And a few chapters later, when they're in India, he's kind of panicking because he's like, the longer this runs, the more expensive it gets for me personally, because that gas bill is going to be insane. And then it's kind of dropped for a good while in the middle. And at the very end, it's resolved. It tells you how long it's been running, which is, a cute detail, but other than that, it's kind of benign. And the way it's resolved overall is that the bill gets paid because Mr. Fogg decides to split the remaining money that he didn't spend on his journey. So he has the £20,000 that he kept in the bank. Then he gets the £20,000 from his friends because he won the bet. And then he has £1,000 left over because he had taken £20,000 with him on the journey to bribe and, buy random shit. Because he buys an elephant, gives it away, buys a ship, lets the guy keep the engine and the iron hull. And then a bounty of bribes to get things sped up a little bit here and there. But, so he decides to split the remaining £1,000 from the trip amongst Fix, who he doesn't hold a grudge against, especially since he had already punched him in the face, and Passepartout. But for Passepartout, the gas bill was paid with a portion of his receivings. It didn't tell us exactly how much it cost, though I think it might have given you the formula to do it, because I think near the beginning of the book it tells you about how much it costs per hour. It's either that or it brushes over it. And then at the very end it gives you the total number of hours that it ran. And he said that he looked at the bill and, about fainted. Because the bill had come in while they were gone. So there's a lot of cute details, but the fact that at the very end he's lamenting the fact that he didn't tell Phileas about the fact that Fix was a detective for no reason. Like he just for some reason randomly decides, that vital information, I'll keep it from him for now. Like at first Passepartout thinks that Fix is sent by the Reform Club to slow down Phileas along his journey. But then Fix reveals to him that no, he's a detective, and he thinks that Phileas is a bank robber on the run. And then, he drugs Passepartout and, leaves him in an opium den. But when Passepartout catches up to his boss, he doesn't warn him that, hey, Fix is, a cop. Because at first it makes sense because he doesn't know that Fix is with them. He kind of stays hidden at first. But then once Passepartout sees Fix on the ship, Passepartout beats the shit out of him, then decides not to tell his boss for no reason. And so he kind of rightfully blames himself for the potential loss at the end, because if he had told him about Fix, then he wouldn't have offered to bring Fix along on all these like little misadventures, and he might have made it on time. But the thing is, once they get to Japan, Fix kind of becomes pro, Phileas Fogg, at least until they hit Europe, because his goal through India and into Hong Kong was to, as much as possible, slow him down until the warrant came in. But once they hit Japan, the warrant finally came in, but they were no longer on English soil. So his plan then became to rush them as fast as possible back to England to lock him down and arrest him on English soil. So that's why he becomes kind of pro around the world in 80 days. But his reasoning kind of becomes silly. So his worry, all the way up until they hit Japan, is that he's going to try to disappear. Like once he is out of Hong Kong, there's nothing that Fix can do, because Phileas is just going to disappear in America or Japan, one of these countries that the English don't have, a grip on. But then he just kind of assumes that, okay, so maybe he is trying to do a circuit, but he's trying to use that as an excuse, like as a method to throw off the cop's scent. He went around the world. He wasn't around, or, it's been so long that they'll never suspect me. They'll have forgotten about the 50,000 pounds that were stolen from a bank. So that kind of justification doesn't kind of work terribly well. Some interesting things. The sled thing was kind of cool. I did kind of like the imagery of them dismantling the ship while still riding it. That was kind of fun. But the only other thing that was kind of interesting was the duel that doesn't happen. Because everyone just kind of treats it as like, because a guy insults Fogg's honor, and so originally, like I said, Fogg was going to push it off 6 months so that, he could finish the race and get back and do it, at a more convenient time. But the guy says 6 months, why not 10 years? If you leave now, you're never going to do the duel. So it's now or never. So he says, fine. At the next station, we'll have some time. We'll do there. But the engineer comes out and says, no, we're not stopping. So, yeah, you're going to, you can't do it here. Sorry. Then they offer them the back carriage to do the duel. And everyone's just like so obliging to this scenario. They go to the back carriage and they're like, hey, could you guys clear out? These guys are going to try to kill each other. And they're like, okay. And they just leave and just let them take the carriage to do a duel. And the carriage is like 50 feet long. And there's like, they say, oh, it's like perfect for dueling. They're getting ready. And then the train's attacked. And it just kind of gets washed away. Because the guy that challenged Fogg gets severely injured, but he'll survive. But Fogg comes out of the attack unscathed and perfectly fine. So it's a bit of a mess there. I kind of wish that they did just duke it out and shoot each other. It would have been funny. It's hinted when Phileas takes over the ship in the Bloodless Mutiny that he was once a sailor because of the way that he commands the ship. He commands, he knows what to do and how to do it. So they just kind of start assuming that he was once a sailor because his background is literally a big old question mark. They don't know where he came from. They don't know where he gets his money or anything because he doesn't do a job. He doesn't do much of anything. So people are just curious. But yeah, I think overall, it's a fine book. I would not actively seek it out. Personally, I'm not going to read it again. I'm not going to actively, choose to reread it. It kind of feels a bit like a school assignment book, probably because for some people, it is. It is a classic. If you have a love for classics and, what you can get from them, then I say, have a ball. It's fine. It's not the most exciting or, fun book I've read. Like, I've read John Carter of Mars, and that was pretty fun. I've read part of Tarzan. That's okay. I've read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That's another short one that, it feels like not a whole lot's happening, but it's a bit more interesting than the not a whole lot happening here. It tries to make it feel like it's a breakneck pace while not being a breakneck pace, and I think that's partially down to the fact that it was serialized. So each of these chapters was released in a magazine at the time. So it kind of makes sense that, so much happens in such a small space. But in full book form, it kind of breaks down a bit. So I guess my recommendation is if you want to read it, but don't want to feel too bogged down by it, go for about a chapter a day. It'll take you a long time to read it, about 36 days, but you might get a bit more out of it. Because you'll at the very least have some kind of break in between. That way you'll be able to kind of forget some parts, but mostly remember the important bits, and you'll kind of get a similar-ish experience as to what's going on. Another small weird thing in this specific copy that I have, there's a footnote in it. Just one footnote. And it's from the translator. of the book, and they just pretty much say, a weird quirk of London clocks. And that's all the footnote says. It's referring to a bit in the last few pages of the book in which it is said that the clock chimes at 10 minutes to 9. And it just says at the bottom, a quirk of London clocks, I guess. And I'm just like, sure. Okay, I'm used to footnotes like that in, manga and whatnot, where there's like little explanations of, what things are and whatnot. But it just appearing this threw me off, especially since it's the only footnote in the entire book. Just threw me for a loop. Anywho, I think that that's a good place to leave it. Once again, I recommend it only if you enjoy classic books. It's relatively short, so it's kind of harmless, but I would probably recommend Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde more. And that's only 3 chapters. Yeah. I'll probably do Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde as a future episode down the line. Other than that, that's it. Please, if you want to email in, the email is in the description. It is lostinscifiandfantasy@gmail.com. I would greatly appreciate suggestions on topics, suggestions on improvements to the podcast. I know that it's pretty much just me rambling for almost an hour, and hopefully you guys enjoy that. It's a bit awkward, but yeah, thank you. I'll talk to you guys later. Goodbye.